The wind in Manhattan during late November doesn't just blow, it carves. It cuts through the canyons of glass and steel, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and expensive cologne, clashing violently with the damp bitterness of the subway grates. Elena huddled in the alcove of a closed boutique on Fifth Avenue, her arms wrapped tightly around 7-year-old Leo. Her coat, once a vibrant wool beige, was now a map of stains and frayed edges, a relic of a life that felt like it belonged to a different woman in a different century. Elena wasn't just cold, she was invisible. To the thousands of commuters rushing past, she was a blur, a glitch in the scenery of their high-powered lives. She had been a linguistics professor in her home country, a master of syntax and phonetics. Now, her most frequent utterance was, "please," a word that felt like ash in her mouth. She remembered the lecture halls of Kiev, the smell of old books, and the respectful silence of her students. Now, that silence was replaced by the roar of the city that didn't care if she lived or died. Leo shivered against her, his small body vibrating with a rhythmic tremor that terrified her. "Mom, is it almost time for the library?" His voice was a thin thread, barely audible over the honking of yellow cabs. "Soon, baby. We just need to wait for the shift change at the shelter," Elena whispered, her voice rasping from the dry, freezing air. She looked up at the towering skyscraper across the street, the headquarters of Sterling and Vance, a global private equity firm. The building was a monolith of success, its gold-tinted windows reflecting a sunset Elena couldn't see from the street level. It stood as a monument to everything she had lost: security, status, and the simple right to be warm. Suddenly, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb, splashing slush onto the sidewalk. Out stepped Marcus Sterling, the firm's CFO. He was the embodiment of New York power. A tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Elena's former annual salary, hair perfectly slicked back, and an expression that suggested he viewed the world as a series of spreadsheets to be optimized. Following him was a group of panicked-looking executives, clutching tablets and leather briefcases like shields. Marcus was shouting into a phone, his face flushed a deep, angry red. "I don't care if the translator's flight is grounded in Chicago. We have the delegation from the Adriatic Investment Group coming up in 10 minutes. If we can't read their revised terms, the merger dies tonight. This is a $6 billion deal, and you're telling me we're held hostage by a snowstorm?" He slammed the car door and paced the sidewalk, right in front of Elena's alcove. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder and shook it at his assistants. "It's a specific dialect. Even our AI software is flagging it as contextually ambiguous. We need a human who understands the nuance of the old-world legal syntax, not some algorithm that thinks indemnity is a synonym for gift." In his frustration, Marcus glanced down and saw Elena. His eyes narrowed, filled with the disdain of a man who equated poverty with a lack of character. To him, she was the ultimate symbol of inefficiency, a waste of prime real estate. A cruel, stressed impulse took over, fueled by the pressure of the impending meeting. "Look at this," Marcus sneered, waving the document toward Elena. "The world is full of people who want something for nothing. Tell you what, sweetheart, you look like you've traveled. I'll pay you my entire monthly salary, right here, a check written on the spot, if you can translate even the executive summary of this. But if you can't, you move your trash to the next block and stop scaring off the clients. Deal?" The assistants gasped, a few looking away in embarrassment. It was a cruel joke, a public shaming designed to vent his spleen. But Elena didn't flinch. She looked at the paper. Her eyes, clouded by exhaustion and the stinging cold, suddenly sharpened. She recognized the script. It wasn't just a language. It was her language. A rare, scholarly dialect of Ostrovo-Slavic used in high-level diplomatic circles of Eastern Europe. A language she had spent 15 years teaching. She reached out a trembling, dirt-streaked hand. "Give it to me," she said, her voice steady, accented, and surprisingly resonant. Marcus froze. He hadn't expected her to speak, let alone with such poise and grammatical precision. The beggar had a voice like a cello, deep, textured, and haunting. For a heartbeat, the power dynamic shifted on the sidewalk. He handed the folder over, a smirk still playing on his lips, though it felt less certain now. "Go ahead. Entertain me. I've got 9 minutes before I have to go up there and lie to a group of billionaires." Elena opened the folder. The dry, academic smell of the high-grade paper hit her like a physical memory. For a moment, the New York winter faded. She wasn't a homeless woman on a freezing sidewalk. She was back in her university office, the late afternoon sun hitting the mahogany desk. She looked at the first paragraph. It was a complex clause regarding maritime rights and deferred equity, written in a style that purposefully used archaic grammar to hide loopholes. "This isn't standard business prose," Elena said, looking Marcus directly in the eye. She didn't look up at him. She looked at him as an equal. "It uses the 19th century legalistic Ostrava style. It's designed to be deceptive. If you use a standard translator or a machine, you'll miss the fact that Section 4.2 isn't a guarantee of payment. It's a conditional indemnity based on a local court's definition of act of God. They are planning to default on you the moment the first storm hits the Adriatic." The sidewalk went silent. The roar of the city seemed to recede into the background. Marcus's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of intense, predatory focus. "What did you just say?" Read the next line. Elena began to read, translating the complex, archaic language into fluid, perfect English. She didn't just swap words. She interpreted the soul of the document. She explained the hidden pitfalls in the grammar, the subtle ways the Adriatic group was trying to protect their assets while appearing to offer them up as collateral. She spoke for 5 minutes, her voice growing stronger with every sentence, the linguistic exercise acting as a stimulant to her tired brain. Leo watched his mother, his eyes wide. He hadn't seen her look this alive since they crossed the border. She looked like the queen he remembered from his early childhood, a woman who held the world in her words. When she finished, she closed the folder with a snap and handed it back. "The salary you mentioned," she said quietly, the cold finally beginning to seep back into her bones. "I don't want a check. Not yet. My son is shivering, he has a fever, and he needs a doctor. If you want the rest of this translated, and believe me, the middle section on tax liability is even more treacherous, take us inside. Give us warmth. Give him food." Marcus looked at the document, then at his assistants, who were frantically checking their phones. "Sir," one whispered, his face pale. "I just ran the term Ostrava Slavic through the database. She's right. It's a dead legal dialect. Our firm in London said it would take 48 hours to find an expert." Marcus looked at Elena. Truly looked at her. He saw the intelligence behind the grime, the fierce protective stance she took over the boy. He saw a woman who had been through a war and was still standing. His ego fought with his desperation, and for the first time in a long time, the pragmatist in him realized that the most valuable asset in Manhattan was currently sitting on a piece of cardboard. "Fine," Marcus snapped, though his voice lacked its previous bite. "Inside, but through the service entrance. I can't have the board seeing me walk in with—" He stopped himself, the word beggar dying in his throat. "Just move. We go through the front door," Elena countered, her voice like iron. "Or we stay on the sidewalk, and you lose your $6 billion. Marcus gritted his teeth, the cold air stinging his lungs. He looked at the gold revolving doors of his empire. "Front door. Move. Fast." The lobby of Sterling and Vance was a cathedral of marble and silent security guards. It was a space designed to make people feel small, but Elena walked through it with a spine of steel. As she and Leo walked across the polished floors, their boots, worn and caked with the gray slush of the street, left damp, muddy prints on the white stone. The security guards moved to intervene, their hands reaching for their radios, but Marcus waved them off with a sharp, dismissive gesture that brooked no argument. They ascended in a glass elevator that shot upward like a rocket. Leo pressed his nose against the pane, watching the lights of the city shrink below them. "Look, Mom, we're flying." "The people look like ants." Elena squeezed his hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt a wave of vertigo, not from the height, but from the sheer surreality of the moment. An hour ago, she was wondering if they would find enough cardboard to layer their sleeping spot against the damp. Now, she was headed to the sanctum sanctorum of global finance. She felt the eyes of the executives on her, eyes full of judgment and confusion. But she ignored them. She was a doctor of linguistics. She had commanded lecture halls of 500 people. These men were just another audience. They entered the boardroom. A group of stern men in dark suits sat around a 40-foot mahogany table. In the center was a high-tech speakerphone, already connected to the Adriatic Group in Europe. The room smelled of expensive leather and ozone. Marcus, finally, a senior partner named Silas Henderson barked. He was an older man with white hair and the temperament of a cornered wolf. "Who is this? Why are you bringing a person from the street into a closed-door session?" "This is our consultant," Marcus said, the word tasting strange but necessary. "She has the translation. And Silas, if you say one more word about her appearance, I'll let her walk out that door and you can explain to the shareholders why the merger collapsed over a grammar mistake." Elena sat at the head of the table. Marcus pulled out a chair for her, an unconscious act of repressed manners that didn't go unnoticed by the others. She laid the documents out. For the next 3 hours, Elena became the bridge between two worlds. She didn't just translate words, she translated intent. She caught a deceptive phrasing in a non-compete clause that would have cost Sterling and Vance $40 million over 5 years. As she worked, a junior associate brought in a tray of sandwiches and hot tea. Leo ate with a quiet, desperate hunger, his small hands shaking as he held a turkey club sandwich. The men in the room looked away, a collective sense of discomfort settling over them. They were used to numbers on a screen, not the physical manifestation of hunger. Elena's mind was a blur of technical jargon and legal syntax. She felt the fever in her own body rising, the exhaustion threatening to pull her under, but she pushed through. Every corrected sentence was a brick in the wall she was building to protect Leo. When the call finally ended, the Adriatic Group had conceded to the terms, realizing their linguistic trap had been sprung. The merger was secure. The room erupted in a collective sigh of relief, the tension evaporating like steam. Marcus stood up and walked to his desk at the far end of the room. He pulled out a checkbook. He paused, looking at the figure he was about to write. His monthly salary was more than most people made in 3 years. A staggering $85,000. He looked at Elena, who was now leaning back, her face pale, her hand resting on Leo's head. "A deal is a deal," he muttered, the scratch of his pen the only sound in the room. As Marcus began to write the check, Silas Henderson stood up, his face a mask of indignation. "Marcus, you can't be serious. You're giving a fortune to a vagrant because she knows a dead language? This is a misappropriation of firm funds. Give her $100 and a hotel voucher. Let's be realistic. She probably stole those papers from a trash can." Elena froze. The warmth from the tea evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. She stood up, pulling Leo to her side. The boy looked up at Henderson, his eyes filled with a fear that no child should know. "I didn't ask for your charity, Mr. Henderson," Elena said, her voice echoing in the plush room. "I provided a service your entire firm, with its billions of dollars and Ivy League degrees, was incapable of performing. You didn't pay for my poverty. You paid for my expertise. If you find that unrealistic, then perhaps you should reconsider the value of the deal I just saved for you." Marcus looked at the check, then at Henderson, then at Elena. He saw the way Henderson looked at her, as a nuisance to be disposed of. He remembered his own father's face when the bank took their house, the way the neighbors looked through them as if they had become transparent. "I made a bet, Silas," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "In this building, we honor contracts. If I don't pay her, I'm a liar, and I don't run my department on lies. I run it on results. Dr. Sokolov gave us results. You gave us panic." He finished writing the check and handed it to Elena. The amount was $85,000. Elena stared at the numbers. It was a lifeline. It was a year of safety, an apartment with a lock, clothes that didn't smell of the street, school for Leo, and a proper lawyer for her asylum claim. Her hands shook so violently the paper rattled like a leaf in the wind. "Thank you," she whispered, the word nearly breaking. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus said, his eyes shifting to the door. "You can't exactly walk into a bank looking like that and deposit a check of this size without being interrogated. They'll call the police before you hit the teller's window." He turned to his personal assistant, Sarah, who had been watching from the corner. "Sarah, book the penthouse suite at the Palace Hotel, under the firm's account. Take them there in my car. Get them whatever they need. Clothes, food, a private doctor for the boy. And Sarah, Make sure the hotel staff treats them like royalty. He looked back at Elena. Be here tomorrow at 9 a.m. I have a stack of Mediterranean contracts that need a consultant's eye. We'll discuss a proper salary then. This check? Consider it your signing bonus. Elena walked out of the boardroom, the check clutched to her chest. But as the elevator descended, she saw Henderson whispering into his phone, his eyes fixed on her back. The look on his face wasn't one of defeat. It was the look of a man who was about to call in a very different kind of debt. The hotel suite was a palace of cream-colored silk, mahogany furniture, and soft, recessed lighting that made the world feel gentle. For Leo, it was a playground. He ran his hands over the velvet sofas and marveled at the television that rose from a hidden cabinet. He jumped on the king-sized bed, laughing for the first time in months until he started coughing again. A deep, wet, rattling sound that made Elena's heart clench with a physical pain. The firm's assistant, Sarah, had stayed to help. She was a young woman with a kind face who seemed genuinely moved by their situation. She had brought bags of clothes from a nearby department store, soft sweaters, sturdy boots, and pajamas for Leo. She had also arranged for a private doctor to visit, a man who arrived with a leather bag and a quiet, professional demeanor. He has early-stage pneumonia, the doctor said after examining Leo. The boy was now tucked under a heavy down comforter, his skin pale and clammy. He's exhausted, malnourished, and his lungs are struggling. He needs rest, high-dosage antibiotics, and a warm environment. Another 3 nights on the street and, well, it wouldn't have been good. You got him here just in time. Elena sat by Leo's bed as he finally fell into a medicated sleep. She had showered for 30 minutes, the hot water washing away months of New York soot and the lingering scent of despair. But as she sat there in a borrowed robe, she couldn't wash away the anxiety. She looked at the check on the nightstand. It felt like a dream that would vanish at sunrise. In her experience, when things seemed this good, the shadow was usually right behind them. She couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft. The room too quiet. She sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. She thought about her husband, Mikhail. He had been a journalist, a man who believed that words could change the world. He had been killed for speaking the same truths she had used today to save a hedge fund. She had fled with Leo across 3 borders, losing her books, her home, and her identity in the process. Around 2:04 a.m., there was a quiet, rhythmic knock on the door. Elena stiffened, her survival instincts kicking in. She moved silently to the door and peered through the peephole. It was Marcus. He looked disheveled, his tie loosened, his eyes tired. She opened the door slightly, the security chain still engaged. "Mr. Sterling? What are you doing here at this hour? Is there a problem with the translation?" "I couldn't sleep," he said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked at the room, then at Elena. In her clean state, with her hair washed and pulled back, the transformation was staggering. She looked like the professor she once was. "Henderson is making moves. He spent the evening pulling the security tapes from the lobby. He thinks I'm unstable for bringing you in. He's going to try to block the check in the morning at the corporate level, claiming I was under duress, or that you're a fraud who practiced law without a license." Elena's heart dropped into her stomach. "I knew it. I knew it was too good to be true." "It's not," Marcus said, stepping into the room as she unlatched the chain. "But you need to know who you're dealing with. This isn't just about a translation anymore. You've become a pawn in a boardroom power struggle. Henderson wants my job, and he thinks you're the weapon he can use to get it. And I realized I don't even know your last name." "Sokolov," she said, standing tall. "Dr. Elena Sokolov. I have a PhD from Oxford, Mr. Sterling. I am not a fraud." "Dr. Sokolov," Marcus repeated, the title clicking into place like a key in a lock. "Listen to me very carefully. Henderson isn't just going after the money. He's going after you. He's going to check your background. He has friends in the State Department. If he finds out you're undocumented or that you have any legal gaps in your residency, he'll use it to deport you rather than pay you. He's a shark, Elena. He doesn't see a person. He sees a liability." Elena felt the walls of the beautiful suite closing in. The silk and gold suddenly felt like a cage. "I have my papers, but they are complicated. My asylum claim is pending. My work authorization was tied to a university sponsorship that was revoked when I fled. If he stirs the waters, the system will swallow me. They don't look at PhDs, they look at visa codes. Marcus paced the small living area of the suite, his shadow long against the cream walls. Then we don't give him the chance to look at your visa. We make you indispensable. Those contracts I mentioned earlier? They aren't just Mediterranean. They are the keys to a Middle Eastern infrastructure deal we've been chasing for years. It's worth triple what we did today. I need you to translate the intelligence reports I have on the partners. I need you to prove to the board that without you, the firm loses billions. We make you a subject matter expert of such importance that the legal team will be forced to protect you. Why are you doing this? Elena asked, her voice skeptical, her eyes searching his. Is it just to spite Henderson? Is it just the bet? Marcus stopped pacing. He looked at the closed bedroom door where Leo was sleeping. When I was 10, my father was a top architect. He built half the skyline in Jersey. Then the Aero 8 crash happened. He lost one project, then another. Within a year, the bank took everything. We lived out of a Ford Taurus for 6 months, parked behind a grocery store so we could use their light to do my homework. He was a brilliant man, but people looked at him like he was dirt, like he was a failure because he was poor. He looked back at her, his expression raw. I saw that same look in the mirror today when I mocked you on the sidewalk. I saw the man I've become, the kind of man who would have spit on my own father. I hated myself for it. Helping you. Maybe it's the only thing I've done in 10 years that isn't about a profit margin. It's about not being that man anymore. They spent the rest of the night working. Elena translated, and Marcus strategized. They sat side by side at the mahogany table, fueled by room service espresso and a shared sense of defiance. Elena translated coded messages and regional dialects that revealed a secret partnership between the Saudi firm and a German competitor. She built a case for her employment that was bulletproof. By dawn, they had a 50-page dossier of translated intelligence that shifted the entire strategy of Sterling and Vance. But as the sun rose over the East River, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, Elena noticed a black SUV parked across from the hotel. 2 men in suits were watching the entrance, their faces obscured by sunglasses. Henderson's men, Marcus whispered, looking through the blinds. He's not waiting for the board meeting. He's calling ICE. He wants you picked up before you can set foot in the building. We have to move, Marcus said, grabbing his coat. His voice was sharp, the adrenaline of the night shifting into survival mode. If they process you, the check becomes void as proceeds of illegal activity because you worked without a current permit. Henderson will use the law to rob you of your future. But Leo, Elena cried, her eyes darting to the bedroom. He can't be moved. The doctor said he needs a controlled environment. The antibiotics, we take the hotel's private medical transport. It's an ambulance. They won't stop an ambulance, Marcus said, already on his phone. I'll tell them it's an emergency transport for a high-profile guest. We bypass the lobby and go through the loading dock. They woke Leo. He was groggy and pale, his breath still coming in shallow whistles. Marcus coordinated with the hotel manager, a man who owed Marcus a dozen favors for a past investment, and within 20 minutes, they were in the back of a private transport vehicle, lying low as they sped past the black SUV. As they sped through the streets toward the Sterling and Vance headquarters, Elena held Leo's hand, her heart racing. Why are we going back there? She asked. Shouldn't we hide? Go to a different city? In New York, you don't hide from power, Marcus said, his eyes fixed on his phone as he sent a flurry of emails. You overwhelm it. If we go to the board meeting now, with the press I've just leaked the merger details to, Henderson can't touch you without tanking the stock price. If he arrests the hero of the deal, the shareholders will hang him. You leaked the merger? Elena gasped. You could lose your job for that. I'm the CFO, Elena, Marcus said with a grim, determined smile. In this building, I am the job. Besides, I told the New York Times that a brilliant linguistic expert saved the deal. If they find out that expert is being harassed by the firm's own board, it's a PR nightmare they can't afford. We aren't just translating documents anymore. We're translating public opinion. They arrived at the skyscraper. The lobby was already swarming with reporters, tipped off by Marcus's anonymous leak. Marcus stepped out of the ambulance first, shielding Elena and Leo with his body. The flashbulbs were blinding, a barrage of white light against the gray morning. "Mr. Sterling, who is the woman? Is the merger finalized? Is it true she's a refugee scholar?" "No comments until the board meeting!" Marcus shouted, ushering them into the private lift. As the doors closed, Elena caught a glimpse of Henderson standing near the reception desk. His face was a deep, bruised purple. He had a phone to his ear, and he was screaming so loud she could hear the muffled rage through the closing doors. The trap was set, but it was no longer clear who was the hunter and who was the prey. The boardroom was tense, the air thick with the smell of expensive coffee and the metallic tang of cold sweat. Silas Henderson stood at the head of the table, flanked by two men from the firm's legal compliance team. They looked like undertakers. "Marcus, you've lost your mind," Henderson hissed, slamming a folder onto the table. "Bringing a homeless woman and her sick child into a high-security facility? Leaking internal deal structures to the press? You're finished. I've already called the authorities. They are waiting downstairs." Marcus sat down calmly, placing Elena's new dossier on the table with a heavy thud. "I didn't leak secrets, Silas. I leaked success. And as for Dr. Sokolov, she isn't a homeless woman. She is the former chair of linguistics at the University of Kiev, a published author, and currently the only person in this room who understands why our Saudi partners are about to walk away from the table." Elena stepped forward. She was tired. Her son was being cared for in the next room by a nurse Marcus had hired, and she had nothing left to lose. She looked at Henderson, not with fear, but with a cold, academic pity. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room, "you think my value is determined by the dirt on my old coat, but wealth is fleeting. I had it, and I lost it. You have it now. But your ignorance is a liability. On page 12 of your current proposal for the Al Jabr Group, you've used a term that, in the local dialect of your partners, is a direct insult to their lineage. If you send that document, you don't just lose the deal. You lose your reputation in the entire region. You are walking into a minefield with your eyes closed." Henderson laughed, a dry, mocking sound that didn't reach his eyes. "And why should we believe a woman who was begging for nickels yesterday? You're an illegal alien looking for a payday." "Because," Marcus interrupted, "I've already sent the correction to the partners, and they just replied with an invitation to sign the final contracts. They thanked us for our uncommon cultural sensitivity, and specifically asked to meet the scholar who found the error." Marcus pushed a tablet across the table. It showed a confirmation email from the Saudi delegation, praising the firm's impeccable attention to detail. The other board members began to murmur, their loyalty shifting as they saw the dollar signs attached to Elena's work. The tide was turning. Henderson looked around, realizing he was standing on a sinking ship. His face paled as he realized he had tried to deport the firm's newest and most valuable asset. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom finally clicked shut, leaving a resonant silence that contrasted sharply with the chaotic storm of the last few hours. The meeting had ended in what the financial news would later call a strategic landslide. The board of directors, men and women who usually measured success in basis points and quarterly yields, had been captivated. Motivated by the potential of billions in the Middle Eastern infrastructure deal, and terrified by the PR disaster Marcus had skillfully positioned over their heads, they had voted unanimously. Elena was no longer a ghost in an alcove. She was officially retained as a special consultant for international relations. The authorized starting salary was a figure so substantial it made the initial $85,000 check, the one that had caused so much strife, look like mere pocket change. But more important than the money was the legal machinery now grinding into motion. The firm's legal team, a phalanx of the most expensive and aggressive attorneys in New York, had been instructed to drop everything else. Their sole priority was to expedite Dr. Elena Sokolov's H-1B visa under the Individual of Extraordinary Ability category. They weren't just filing paperwork, they were building a fortress around her. Silas Henderson's exit had been less dignified. He had been asked to take an immediate leave of absence pending a full internal investigation into his conduct. As he was escorted out, the two men from compliance flanked him like shadows, and for the first time, the predator looked like prey. Now, as the room cleared, only Marcus and Elena remained. The high afternoon sun flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the boardroom in a warm, golden light that made the marble tables glow and the dust motes dance like microscopic gold leaf. The filtered air was crisp, a far cry from the biting chill of the Fifth Avenue sidewalk. "You did it," Marcus said, finally allowing his shoulders to drop. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair, looking utterly spent. Yet for the first time since Elena had met him, his face was free of the tight, cynical mask of the CFO. He looked truly happy. "You're a citizen of the corporate world now, Elena. With the firm's backing and that visa category, you're essentially untouchable. Henderson's threats are nothing but dead air now." Elena didn't sit. She walked to the window, looking down at the tiny ant-like yellow cabs far below. "We did it, Marcus," she corrected softly. She turned to face him, her expression a mix of gratitude and lingering disbelief. "I have to ask, why? You risked everything. Your career, your reputation, your seat at this very table. You could have been fired, even arrested for leaking those merger details. You didn't even know my last name when you decided to burn your life down to save mine. Why did you go that far for a stranger?" Marcus stayed silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the New York skyline, the labyrinth of steel he had spent his life trying to conquer. "Because for the first time in years, Elena, I can look at my reflection in these windows and see something other than a shark. I spent a decade convinced that the only way to survive this city was to be the coldest person in the room. But when I saw you on that sidewalk, I didn't see a homeless woman. I saw my father." He stood up, his voice regaining its strength. "He was a brilliant man, an architect who saw beauty in structure. When we were living in that car, he still tried to teach me about the golden ratio using the stars through the windshield. You reminded me that words have power, that intellect isn't tied to a bank account, and that people aren't just entries on a ledger to be managed or deleted. My father, he would have liked you. He would have respected your syntax." He walked over to her and reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a small silver key attached to a simple leather fob. He took her hand, her skin was finally warm, and placed the key in her palm. "This is for a corporate apartment the firm owns on the Upper West Side," he explained. "It's been sitting empty, reserved for visiting dignitaries. Now it's yours for as long as you work for us. It's fully furnished, there's a view of the park, and most importantly, there's a world-class school just 3 blocks away for Leo. I've already spoken to the headmaster. They have a great soccer program and a linguistics club. He's expected on Monday." Elena looked down at the key. It felt heavy, solid, and real. The cold metal was the final proof that the nightmare was over. The tears she had held back through the war, through the flight across the ocean, and through the freezing nights on the street, finally broke through her composure. They spilled down her cheeks, hot and unrestrained. "I don't know how to repay you, Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You didn't just give us a job. You gave us our names back. You gave us our lives." Marcus smiled, a genuine, lopsided expression that made him look years younger. He reached out and awkwardly, but kindly, patted her shoulder. "Just show up on Monday morning, Dr. Sokolov. We have a lot of work to do. And maybe, in your spare time, you can teach me how to say, 'don't be an idiot' in 5 different languages. Based on the people I have to deal with on the board, I have a feeling I'm going to need to say it quite often." 6 months later, the New York spring was in full, glorious bloom. Central Park had transformed from a gray, skeletal landscape into a riot of green and pink. The air no longer carried the sharp edge of ice. Instead, it smelled of damp earth, fresh-cut grass, and cherry blossoms. It was the kind of day that made even the most cynical New Yorker pause and breathe. Elena sat on a green wooden bench near the sheep meadow, watching a blur of color in the distance. It was Leo. He was wearing a bright orange jersey, running across the grass with a group of children his age. His cheeks were rosy, not from fever, but from exertion and joy. His laughter, clear and strong, carried across the meadow. He was the top of his class at the academy, a bilingual prodigy who moved between English and his native tongue with effortless grace. Most importantly, he no longer jumped at the sound of a car backfiring or a siren. He only jumped to intercept the soccer ball, Elena looked down at the tablet resting in her lap. She was reviewing a series of complex diplomatic cables for a new infrastructure project in Eastern Europe. She wore a simple, elegant navy suit and a silk scarf. Clothes that reflected her status, but more importantly, clothes that made her feel like herself again. She was no longer a shadow or a glitch in the scenery. When people walked past her now, they saw a woman of substance, a woman of authority. She was Dr. Elena Sokolov, the woman who had redefined the way Sterling and Vance approached international ethics. A shadow fell over her tablet, blocking the glare of the sun. She looked up to see Marcus standing there. He was dressed casually in a sweater and slacks, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He was carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee and a white paper bag from a local bakery. "The Adriatic Group is asking for you again," Marcus said by way of greeting, handing her one of the cups. "Apparently, the second phase of the merger is hitting a snag. They told Silas's replacement that they won't sign a single document without the professor overseeing the nuances. They say you're the only one who speaks their language. And they aren't talking about the Ostrava dialect anymore. They mean the language of integrity." Elena smiled, taking a sip of the coffee. "Tell them they'll have to wait until Monday. I promised Leo we'd go for ice cream after his game. A high-level consultant needs her work-life balance, doesn't she?" Marcus laughed and sat down beside her. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city pulse around them. This wasn't a fairy tale of magic wands, glass slippers, or impossible coincidences. It was a fairy tale of human grit, the unyielding power of an education that no one could take away, and the unexpected grace of a man who had looked into the abyss of his own cynicism and decided to reach back for his humanity. "You know," Marcus said, looking out at the skyline, "I never did technically pay you that monthly salary out of my own pocket. The board was so impressed they insisted on a corporate contract that actually pays you more than I make in a month." Elena laughed, the sound bright and clear, blending with the park's ambient noise. "I think I'm doing all right, Marcus. We have a roof that doesn't leak, a future that isn't a question mark, and most importantly, we have a voice again." "Actually," Marcus said, his tone turning serious as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small rectangular box wrapped in understated silver paper. "I figured I still owed you a bonus. For that night on the sidewalk. For the 'I'll pay you my salary' comment. It was a reminder of the man I was becoming, and a thank you for the person you helped me remember I could be. Consider it a late payment for the most important lesson I've ever learned." Elena opened the box carefully. Inside lay a beautiful vintage fountain pen. Its body was a deep, marbled burgundy, and its nib was crafted from 18-karat gold. Engraved in delicate script along the side were 4 words. "The pen is mightier, to the woman who translated a miracle out of a cold night," Marcus said quietly. Elena held the pen, feeling its weight and the smooth texture of the gold. She looked at her son, thriving in the sunlight, and then at the man who had become her most trusted ally. The Manhattan wind still blew through the trees, but today it didn't carve or cut. It felt like a gentle push, an invitation to keep moving forward. "Come on," Elena said, standing up and waving to Leo as the whistle blew to end the game. "The game is over, and we have a celebration to get to. I think it's time we start writing the next chapter of this story. I believe the word for this moment in my language is Nadia." "What does it mean?" Marcus asked, standing with her. "It means hope," she replied, her eyes bright. As they walked across the park together, the professor who had lost everything and the financier who had found himself, the city of New York didn't seem like a concrete jungle or a glass fortress anymore. It was a vast, living library of millions of stories. And for Elena and Leo, the best chapters were just beginning.